Welcome to this Haas webinar on Developer Experience Strategy, where we're going to cover accelerating your developer experience program. Today, we're going to start off by going over some new developer experience trends, strategy, including a framework and how you can build your own comprehensive developer experience strategy, and tactical tips on accelerating your DX program. We're also excited to be joined by three special guests today. First, Mike Stowe, the Director of Developer Marketing from Ring Central. Tanay Pant, the Head of Developer Relations at N8N. And Brandon Satram, the Director of DevX and DevRel at Blues Wireless. Let's start off by diving into some DX trends. Wowing developers is now mandatory. The API universe is exploding with growth. There are new entrants daily, including both new API-oriented startups, as well as larger enterprises offering new services to customers. This growth has raised the bar for what developers expect from companies that offer APIs. Companies that see this transformation coming and understand that wowing developers is critical will thrive, while those that don't will find their customers going elsewhere. Now, we dove into this deeper with the Haas Developer Experience Report of 2020 and really identified those features that developers rated as must-have and also that they noted were commonly missing. 92% of developers list clear and concise documentation as a must-have in any developer portal. Now, if we go look at the chart on the right, we see that 33% of the time this is missing. Well-done tutorials and guides are near the top on the must-have list, but almost half the time they're missing from developer portals. API Explorers, API Analytics are a couple other to call out here that you really want to make sure exist in your portal to create that wow experience and help your customers self-serve. And developers want to be self-reliant. This was another one of the insights that we found in our developer experience report. This is no big surprise, but I think it's important to dive into here and really hammer home the point in terms of kind of what your customers want to see. 85% of developers say that they prefer to research and solve problems on their own, and 77% say they participate in Stack Overflow and other communities to help research and find answers to their problems. This is important for a couple different reasons. One, you need to provide the tools that your customers need to self-serve. So this is not only documentation, but these are things like a great developer portal and dashboard where they can dive into the request log and so forth, an API Explorer. The other thing it points out is that you should be monitoring these other communities to look for your users troubleshooting issues. This can be a great source of product insight. We also expect you as a product owner to help contribute to those third-party communities as well. And we'll talk a little bit about this more later on, but these are two important insights to call out. We found that on average, developers rate the portals they use 5.7 out of 10. Of course, that's abysmal, and everyone needs to be doing better than that. So let's dive into the strategy framework for a moment. At Haas, we help teams develop a comprehensive DX strategy. And really, this is made up of four components. One, industry trends, and we went through a couple earlier, but really specific to not only developer experience in the API universe as a whole, but really your industry as well. Two, run through a DX SWOT analysis. Three, a benchmarking exercise. And four, a documentation and content gap analysis. This makes up the strategy, project plan, and necessary resources to make sure your DX program is a success. So just like a company SWOT analysis, a DX SWOT analysis really dives into the strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, threats, and challenges of your DX program and capabilities. So starting with asking yourself the question, what are the company's core developer experience competencies? Where does the company have a DX competitive edge? For example, we help companies go through this exercise all the time. We feel like this is one of the most important exercises that you should conduct at the onset of this initiative. Benchmarking is another critical exercise. This can be competitors, but also just those companies that do a particularly good job with developer experience. Stripe, Plaid, for example. So in this exercise, we go through the developer experience success factors like documentation, tutorials and guides, interactivity, tools, and so on. And we rank how well you're doing against your competitors and identify those gaps where you need to invest more into your developer experience. So let's dive in tactically on how to accelerate your developer experience program. And to kick things off, we're going to hear from Mike Stowe, the Director of Developer Marketing at RingCentral, from a recent episode of Haas Hangouts about internal evangelism and collaboration. Mike gives some really great tips about how to win executive buy-in and the metrics that really matter.
What is your perspective on how you can empower those teams? What metrics and insights do you need to not only have as the core team leading this initiative, but really that need to be syndicated out across the company?
So this is a loaded question in a lot of ways, in which I break it down to a couple different components. Yeah. And the first thing is you have to have executive buy-in. That's an absolute must to be successful. And that also means that you have to have their trust. And every place I've gone into, I've had to sit down and have a conversation. And going back to the 14 executives, 15 different things. It's sitting down and saying, I understand this is what you're looking for, but what's the bottom line? Because if they're saying things like, oh, I want 100 developers in the community or 1,000 developers in the community, those are what I refer to as vanity metrics. They actually don't mean anything. And we see this oftentimes with API calls or monthly active users.
Right.
What's it actually mean for the business outside of it's a cost center? So understand what their exact goal is long term. What do you want in a year? But where do you see this program going, or where do you see this program driving for the company? And more often than not, it's going to come down to revenue. We want developers using our API, so that increases stickiness, or we want to sell additional services, or whatever it may be. Once you understand that, then you have to be very clear with them that this is what we're going to do. We're going to drive that. Now, you're not going to get everything you want in the process. Again, we can't do 15 different things. We can't have 15 different KPIs, especially KPIs that would contradict each other. But that's our end goal. That's what we're going to drive to. Now we're going to put together a strategy. And again, I think if you level set, say it's not going to be exactly what you want, but it's going to drive the end goal. Yeah. A lot of executives are very open to that. Once you do that, you come up with a strategy. I think it's important to have two different sets of metrics. You have your primary KPIs, and for myself, I like the developer journey or the standard marketing funnel for that, where you have interest, awareness, consideration, adoption, and then advocacy. And the reason I like that is because it lets me measure every step of the funnel if I'm doing my job. If I see people, a lot of interest through website traffic, for example, but nobody's creating a sandbox account or considering using us, then I need to fix that part of the funnel. Or if I'm seeing a lot of people create sandbox accounts, but nobody's actually using it in production, I have to understand why that is. So that's why I like that funnel. So having your primary KPIs, and those are going to really be the KPIs that drive your program overall. And then those can roll into things like revenue. The secondary KPIs, though, and I'll get myself in trouble, we have over 100, I think 170 KPIs that we track at RingCentral. Wow. Now, I will be very clear that I don't look at 170 KPIs every day. I don't care about 170 KPIs. I have my 6 I care about, but we have KPIs for our social team. So when we look at Twitter, those might be things like number of impressions, number of engagements, number of clicks, etc. When we look at blogs, number of reads, number of shares, number of comments. When we look at the platform, number of new accounts, number of sandbox apps, number of apps in production. So we really break it down, one, at the high level, so we can see what's working or where we're going in the funnel. And then secondly, into the different components, so that if we say, look, we got an issue in, again, the adoption area, I can go right and look at the adoption metrics and say, okay, here's the key metrics. Where's that blinking red light that needs to be fixed? Yeah. But again, I cannot emphasize enough that while you have these metrics, what you do has to roll up to the company's goals and objectives. When I joined, and actually, I'm going to pick on almost every company. Almost every company I've joined, with the exception of one, developer marketing was that, oh, yeah, we have developer marketing now. This is exciting. Yay. They don't actually do anything, but we have developer marketing.
Right.
Uh,
Checkbox done.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Checkbox. We're good to go. And without having those metrics, and especially if you report into a marketing department, marketing is not just metric driven, but revenue driven, where every dollar they spend, they have to bring in X more dollars. And so if they look at you and say you're just a cost center, you're not accomplishing anything, and you're part of marketing, then you almost become the castaway, or the black sheep of marketing. And again, that's something that I've experienced in almost all my programs initially. Is we don't understand why you're here. What do you do?
Yeah. Right.
But by building out these metrics, building out these KPIs, and saying, here's what we did with this, and they start seeing those talking points. And the first year is going to be mostly vanity metrics. We got 100,000 developers. Oh, that's a real number I can latch onto. But then you turn around and say, and we got $50 million of revenue. And again, I'm making up numbers here. And so for a startup, that might be, we got $5,000 our first year in revenue or a new product launch. That's when they're going to start really seeing the value and going, yeah, we need to support this, because not only are you making it successful, but you're driving revenue or driving customer adoption. I think culture is the absolute key to being successful in anything in a lot of ways. I mean, if you look at where businesses tend to fail or succeed, it's at the leadership level, it's at the direction the company's taking, and it's the values the company instills, down the line. In terms of developer relations, developer marketing, I think one of the most important things for us to remember is we're there to serve others. If you're an evangelist, your job is really to, one, serve the company in terms of bringing back information, product reviews, product requests, what messaging is working, what messaging isn't, bugs or issues. But it's also serve the developers and make sure that they know about this great technology, they're successful, their voices are being heard, and you're not trying to sell them something that they don't need or they're not going to be able to use. And again, it goes throughout the entire company of really that servant leadership of how can we serve the community, how can we serve others. And when you take that approach, you really try to create a systemic approach to that in terms of the company overall, so that everyone understands this is our role, this is what we try to do, and that everyone understands that we're focused on creating a symbiotic relationship that's going to benefit the company, going to benefit the developers, and then hopefully that rolls over to the way that you collaborate with other teams, where a team can come to you and say, hey, we know you're going to be there to help us. We know you're going to do what's in the best interest of the company, and we're excited to work with you.
All right, let's move on to developer onboarding. A developer's initial experience begins with your documentation. They'll look at it to answer questions about what's possible and to ensure that you have everything to support their integration. And one of the best ways to help with that first experience is to walk them through a hello world. Give them a getting started guide and emphasize it in the docs, having a really strong call to action to that getting started guide. So, what does a helpful getting started guide look like? Well, it covers the basics, and only the basics, in a really clear and concise manner. So without this initial step, it's going to be hard for the developer to reach the larger goal of a deeper integration. So show them what they need to begin making a very simple call. This guide is the foundation of your documentation. It's the foundation of that initial experience that your customers are going to have. Now, after you've introduced this getting started guide, this hello world, really then you can move on to deeper tutorials. Now, on the surface, a tutorial might seem a lot like a getting started guide. Here's the difference though. Think of the getting started guide as the train station that your developers need to go through to get to their destinations. Now, everyone getting on the train needs to go through the station, but not everyone is going to the same destination, obviously. So likewise, developers, will have different goals and use cases for your API. Now, from the getting started guide, they can diverge and follow the tutorial they need for their own use cases. So, the other great thing about train stations, the large, impossible to miss ticker showing all the destinations, make it so your tutorials are also almost impossible to miss. After the getting started guide, show them exactly where they need to go for next steps on how to get up and running with your API. Now, of course, both getting started guides and tutorials you've made are more useful if they contain actual code snippets, ideally in a language that the developer already uses. Now, you can take a similar approach with your API reference, which should be complete and accurate. Now, you should share, example curl calls as well as copy and paste language specific examples for every endpoint. All of this can seem like a daunting exercise. Sometimes it is, but there are some tools that can make maintaining your docs a breeze, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. But for now, let's look at how docs alone really aren't enough. Let's look at how docs alone aren't enough and how a strong developer experience needs another essential aspect: community. Your docs may answer most questions, but certainly not all of them. Even the most robust documentation can't cover every edge case, so problems just need human support. It's important you provide a place for developers to get that support. It will help more of them get onboarded and keep developers engaged who hit a snag later as well. In fact, there are two places we recommend to have support for your developers. The first is your own developer community. Having a place to facilitate discussion around your API, and your developers will be able to help each other with their problems and grow their collective knowledge for your API. Even checking in on that community hub can help out developers because you can bring back answers into your documentation, some confusion regarding an issue plaguing a community, for example, and then note those internally, how you can adjust docs accordingly. Now, that doesn't mean you're entirely off the hook for providing your own dedicated live support. Some problems aren't possible for community members to solve. That is where you come in. It's always helpful to offer live support for your developers, especially since you'll be the one to address developers' most frustrating issues, such as a billing or account permissions issue. And no, sticking a phone number at the bottom of your website generally does not constitute live support. Developers will seldom call a support number, but they will certainly take advantage of a live chat function. And also consider listening outside of your own walls as well. So some of the best developer relations teams, they're tuned into Twitter, GitHub issues, Stack Overflow, Dev2, and so forth. Developers may ask questions or rant about a problem, and you can be there to provide a helpful answer. I would subscribe to alerts or follow keyword searches, and then make sure you check and respond accordingly. You can use modern tools to streamline the API integration. In addition to docs and support, your product itself can use the same approach to better onboard developers. Guide new developer signups to the tools they need to reach Hello World and beyond. A developer dashboard is critical. Show them the usage metrics. Give them usage alerts. Where are they with their monthly quota and rate limit? Give them a tool like a searchable request log to troubleshoot issues on their own. In their developer dashboard and portal, also provide your customers a launch checklist. You can look at Plaid and Algolia for great examples to follow. Now let's go deeper into developing world-class developer portals in docs. Let's start out by hearing from Tanay Pant, Head of Developer Relations at NAN, from a recent episode of Haas Hangouts about treating docs like a product.
I think a lot of companies have great documentation, but I think this is really important, and this is something that we have been talking about in the company as well, is to treat the documentation like a product. We got to accept the fact that it's a living thing that needs attention and will never be finished.
Right.
Just like a product, you got to do usability testing because this can really bring out shortcomings in your docs that you as an expert might have never thought of. And we did the same thing for parts of our documentation, which are extremely important, like quick start or creating your first workflow in N8N. And the insights that we got out of these sessions were immensely valuable. Just as an example, so one of our creating your first workflows back then was, it's a workflow that runs every day at 8 a.m., gets the weather information for your city. If it's less than 16 degrees, sends you an SMS, hey, take out a sweater with you. Or, if it's not, then it doesn't. So we added GIFs to it, made it incredibly detailed. And we thought, it's a great content piece. People would find it easy to get started with N8N. So I think like we learned about this practice of doing usability testing from the folks at Twilio. So I thought like, okay, let's do this. It's going to be an interesting learning. So I got one of my friends who had never tried out N8N. So I was like, go through this page of the documentation, think out loud. I'm going to put myself on mute and just going to observe you. So it was funny, like he started off with this cron node and he added the time, okay, run at 8 a.m. every day, tries out the workflow, doesn't work for him. It's like, he's thinking like, oh, why isn't that happening? Because the default time zone is New York and not Hamburg or like Berlin, CST. It doesn't, it's like, that's a thing that we never thought about. That's a very good point. Going on, then like we see smaller things like, there's a phone number field in the Twilio node. The person goes on like 0, A, B, C, entering the phone number. And it's like, no, you got to put the country code there. So it's like, okay, these things we never thought about as people who wrote the documentation or use the product so much regularly. So that was amazing to like gain those insights and fix these things.
So as we talked about earlier, developers aren't happy with the portals that they use today. 5.7 out of 10 is pretty bad. Docs are not meeting the needs of developers. Poor documentation was cited as one of the top issues developers frequently face when using third-party APIs. With that, let's talk about 10 ways that you can create delightful developer docs. We'll go through this list here, and then let's jump into some real-world examples that you can use as a benchmark to ensure that you have fantastic documentation. Be comprehensive. Start with the basics. Earlier, we talked about the getting started guides and tutorials and how critical those are. Be clear and concise. Be consistent and stay up to date. We all know there's nothing worse than out-of-date documentation. Provide a getting started guide. Include language-specific code snippets. Really make sure your documentation is interactive throughout. Provide robust tutorials, especially video. Embrace community and comments. And prioritize good navigation and overall great UI. Docs are a core part of your product. They shouldn't be an afterthought. Let's go back to Tanay, where he's going to cover the importance of good word choice when writing documentation.
So at N8N, we focus on creating an inclusive environment for the community. So broadly speaking, that means rude behavior is not tolerated and every question is treated with the same degree of respect. So we encourage people to ask questions, no matter how elementary they think that their question might be. After all, if people are having issues and they're asking basic questions, that could mean either our product's usability can be improved or that we can provide better content or documentation for education. So while creating content, we make sure that our tone of writing reflects our approach to community management. So phrases like simply, easily, just, they don't make it past our editorial review.
Right.
And this might sound like a practice that isn't very significant, but it can really make all the difference. Now, I didn't know that when I was starting out with my writing career. So as I interacted with more companies and their content, I realized how serious this can be. So I remember I discovered a product that used these terms. So I'm going through their content, maybe a tutorial, and it would read on like, setting this up is very easy. And I think, well, this doesn't seem that easy to me. Maybe this isn't the right product fit for me, right? And that's a great way to lose people. So more than that, what happens is the community adapts to things like this. So next time somebody asks a question in their community, the folks will refer to that tutorial or docs and reply, well, it's quite an easy thing to do, which might dissuade people from then participating in the community or from using the product. So like having looked at this, I feel like it's often the small things that can make the biggest difference in this space.
Yeah.
Stripe offers an extensive library of video tutorials on their YouTube channel. Content, tutorials, guides, getting started. This is a big theme. Video is a great way to do this. I think Stripe could actually even improve this by having these videos hosted in their portal in a unified experience. but this is a fantastic starting point. Really invest in video content and guides. On Plaid's documentation homepage, they feature common use cases that walk developers through each. Have a strong call to action to these. Have a guide for every use case, or at least your primary use cases. Your customers will love it. And interactive tutorials, like those that Algolia provide, are particularly helpful. And finally, develop your own bespoke experience. Developer experience is a differentiator. Here, DeepGram, their docs, and API reference and Explorer and guides, it not only is on brand, but it really is an extension of their core product. Have a unified knowledge hub. Your doc search should search across support, video and tutorial libraries, API reference, all of your docs. When developers want to search for an answer, let them access all of that information. That's why we generally advocate for having all of your docs under one unified knowledge hub. And finally, give your customers the tools they need to self-serve. Give them a robust dashboard. Give them a searchable request log. Give them the analytics they need. Developers prefer to self-serve. To wrap things up today, we're going to hear from Brandon Satram, the director of DevX and DevRel at Blues Wireless. Brandon's going to talk to us about measuring success and some of the KPIs that teams should be tracking. As you've seen developer experience change and evolve, where do you think developer experience is going? What does it look like in 5 years compared to today?
I think what we'll end up seeing is a lot of the trends, a lot of the things that are already in flight, especially the last couple of years, around really choosing metrics that matter will be stabilized. I think we'll find some industry best practices around the kinds of things that the developer experience teams really use to evaluate themselves and really prove their value. Developer experience and developer relations as sort of conjoined groups, I think do still struggle, especially with early businesses, of proving their value and showing that they make a difference and how they impact the bottom line. And even though the impact in a lot of ways is indirect, there are things that successful DevX and DevRel teams are starting to do that really do point to downstream value. That can actually point to the success of a sales funnel, that can point to stickiness and engagement among a self-service SaaS product and things along those lines. And so I think even though every company may choose a different set of metrics, I think what we'll see is a lot of the old vanity metrics sort of starting to cycle out.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things that really point towards early developer experience and success and then stickiness of the product over time will really, really start to stabilize, and teams will start to look at those as this is proof that our product has legs, that it has value, that it's worth investing in a DevX and DevRel team.
Yeah. And it certainly varies from team to team, but I'm curious if, just thinking about kind of a B2B SaaS company maybe that is starting this effort, what are some of those kind of KPIs that you would recommend them think about? Not knowing anything, just kind of talking about a generic example.
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing to really think about is what's your goal for the developer's first 5 minutes on using your product or visiting your site even. But really when it comes down to getting their hands on with the product, and I know this can be a challenge for some companies. My company in particular, we are a hardware and software company, so there's a physical component to it as well. But even with that, or if it's pure software, there is value in thinking about what do we want the first 5 minutes to look like? What's something that we want a developer to be able to accomplish within that time frame? That at the end of that, they say, okay, that was cool. That was way faster than I expected that to be, and I got something out of it. So now I'm going to try the next thing. And once you have that, you get sort of that initial hook. The next thing that I think it's important for teams to pay attention to is what your sort of stickiness metric is over time. You can look at it in terms of cohorts, but what are the activities? What is an activity or a set of activities that you can really point to and say that's a customer that's not just kicking the tire. That's a developer that's not just kicking the tires, but they're actually using it. They're trying to solve a problem. They're not just, they're not just toying around. They're actually starting to do something meaningful with it. Yeah. And I think those two things, really any team can apply the specific nouns and verbs based on their own products, but those two things will take you a long way towards the docs you build, the experiences that you structure early on, and how you report out on the success of your efforts.
And so what are some of the vanity metrics that you would encourage teams to stay away from as their DX program matures?
So, some of those things that I've tended to see over time, things that aren't indicative of success, is a vanity metric, and those are those things like raw visits, right? They're obvious ones, and then there's some that can be a little bit subversive. The obvious ones are definitely looking at traffic to your blog, traffic to your site, traffic to your docs, et cetera. Those things are nice and it is important. I mean, obviously 500,000 visits to your docs is better than 5,000 visits to your docs.
Right.
So in one sense, with early growth, that's an important thing to look at. But once you get past a certain point, you need to look at not just how often are people hitting your landing page, but how often are they actually making it to the next step? Are they trying your in-browser tool? Are they going through your quick start and completing, not just starting the quick start, but completing the quick start? And so those are important metrics to avoid. Those just simple growth, we get users in the funnel. We don't really care what they are or how they act. And then the other types of metrics that can be a little bit trickier to identify are those things that may on face seem like valuable metrics, but may be an indication of a problem in the product, like the number of forum requests that you get. Forum requests are good. There's obviously an aspect of community. If you see certain types of behavior in community where people are collaborating, that's useful. But if you're reporting on just raw forum requests, you may be missing the fact that people are actually struggling with your product, and that's why there's so much traffic actually inside the forum itself. So it's important to sort of look through not just those quantitative kinds of numbers, but really to dig in and find out what's actually behind those metrics as well.
Well, thanks for joining today's webinar. You can learn more about how to accelerate your DX program at haas.com. Haas is the developer experience platform.